Hi, thank you for joining in. In the last episode, we talked about how to create access roads when you subdivide land. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about land demarcation through beacons. You're watching Own Land in Kenya. I'm Solomon Wangwe. So normally, when you subdivide land, the first thing your surveyor, licensed surveyor, will do is create points on the ground demarcating the corners for the boundary of your property. So in Kenya, we have two kinds of surveys. The first one is what we call fixed surveys. The second one is what we call general boundary surveys. So what's the difference? Fixed surveys are usually reserved for urban areas where the boundaries of each property are fixed to a GPS position. There are specific coordinates that anyone can plug into their equipment from anywhere in the world, including on Google these days, and it'll show you exactly where the boundary of the property is. This is usually never under dispute because it's based on a global mapping system, and that's a fixed thing. There are no ands, ifs or buts about it. But when you're dealing with agricultural land, which is what we typically deal with, or freehold property, those fall under what is called general boundaries. So for general boundaries, they're basically based on loose demarcations of the dimensions of the properties, and you should have your property clearly indicated or illustrated on a map, what is called a registry index map. This is typically created by the Department of Survey of the Ministry of Lands, and once you have that map, you can use it to go and identify the boundaries of a property. Under the general boundary regime, there's typically a 3 to 5 meter discrepancy or area or margin of error, which means that if your neighbor insists that you've encroached on the property, you'd have to get the registrar who's in charge of your area to get on the ground, and all parties can agree on where to fix the boundary based on both parties' interests, right? Which is very different from fixed boundaries, which are just based on a GPS coordinate, which can't have any arguments, right? So normally, for that reason, you're not allowed to erect any permanent structures on a property that has undergone subdivision through the general boundary regime, which is freehold or agricultural land. I'll give you a quick example. This particular property was subdivided, and the surveyor had installed on the ground, and you've probably seen these before if you've looked for land. It kind of looks like a slab, concrete slab, typically sitting on the surface just like that, and normally they'll inscribe the number. This one doesn't have one, which is problematic because if someone shows you a property and says that's a beacon and it doesn't have the title deed number or the land reference number on it, how do you know it's the right one? Very important thing to note. Normally they have metal pins in them because if it happens to get overgrown by bushes and you're on the site maybe 5 years later looking for the beacon and can't find it, using their equipment, the metal pin will usually guide them on where the actual beacon is. As you can see, this one has a PVC pipe instead of the metal pin. The reason for that, and this is common these days, is because if you use the metal pins, idle herdsmen, normally from the Maasai community or someone with, not the best of intentions for your property, can easily vandalize that beacon and remove the pin. And normally they'll use that for recycling, a scrap metal, or who knows what else you do with it. But normally they'll destroy your beacon for that pin. So these days most surveyors will use PVC pipes which have no value to them, and hopefully it lasts a bit longer than it normally would. Only problem is if you have heavy rainfall, as we typically do at least twice a year in most parts of Kenya, that beacon can easily be washed away or moved by someone unless you have security on the property. In contrast, what we typically do at Goshen Acquisitions is we install 6 foot tall, 10-inch diameter steel reinforced concrete beacons in the ground. Usually half of it will be planted in the ground, 3 feet deep, and set in with concrete. so that it can't be moved. Each one of them typically weighs about 150 to 200 kilograms. So it's not very easy to vandalize or move, which is better for you as far as boundary security and demarcation is concerned for the long haul. In contrast, Goshen Acquisitions typically uses 6 foot tall by 10-inch diameter steel reinforced concrete beacons on all our properties once we've subdivided to demarcate the boundary of our plots. And this is what they look like. In case you ever run across one of these, you'll know who's been there. Half of it is actually planted underground and set in concrete. Each one weighs about 150 to 200 kilos, so no one's moving it anywhere. Unless you're coming onto a site with a bulldozer, it's not going to move. It's not going to be washed away by heavy rains or earth movements, and that guarantees that you don't have boundary disputes in the future. These are very little steps that each one of us can take whenever you own property, especially when they fall under the general boundary regime. And since this property does, one of the things you have to make sure you do when you install one of these semi-permanent, some could be considered permanent boundary demarcations, you have to have your neighbor present when the survey is done, just to make sure that you don't have disputes later on about its precise position relative to your neighbor. Obviously, this is something we do in conjunction with our licensed surveyors who we work with, and that's a very important point to keep in mind whenever you're trying to do your due diligence on a property or whenever you're trying to install beacons on your land. I hope that information helps. If you have any questions or comments that you'd like to make, please feel free to reach out to us, www.goshenacquisitions.com. And if you're interested in making a sound investment on a prime piece of property, I'm actually standing on one of ours. We're offering 1 acre plots, only 500 meters from Laikipia's first 18-hole championship golf course and country homes estate. 4.5 kilometers to my right, the Opejeta Conservancy, one of Africa's most famous. Right in front of me on a clear day, we have stunning, breathtaking views of Mount Kenya, the Loldaiga Hills on my left, and the Aberdare Ranges on my right. Please check out our website, click on the Grand Acres tab on the right-hand corner, and all the information is available. If you know someone, friend or family who's looking to make a sound and savvy investment in the right place at the right time, please feel free to share the information as well. You've been watching Own Land in Kenya. I'm Solomon Wangwe. Stay tuned for more information on strategic land investment.